Welcome back! So this is the second part of the tutorial on factory method. So in this part here, we're going to be looking at this factory pattern thing, and we are going to be looking into this factory class, and we're going to look into how can we actually create objects without knowing about them. So this is our problem. We're standing here. We don't want this. Don't want. I'll write that right here. Not. Okay, don't want. We don't want this stuff because we don't want the game to be connected to the stuff. So how are we going to solve this? So this is where the factory comes in. So let's start out just creating a class. That's always a good thing. Almost always a good thing. So I thought about this, and sometimes I think it's confusing calling it factory because factory is such a generic name. So maybe instead of calling it factory, we could call it something like weaponsmith or something like that. I think it's a better analogy in this case. So we're going to create a class that can smith weapons for us. So just like we can think of this from the game's perspective, the game is kind of like the client here. The game needs a staff, so he goes to, instead of creating it himself, instead of saying creating the new staff, the game does all of the hard work here. I'm going to delegate this responsibility to a weaponsmith. So it's kind of like we create this weaponsmith and say to this guy, now you're responsible for creating all the weapons. So I'm just going to give you like a grocery list or something like that, and then you'll create the weapon, and I don't care how you create them, you just get the name of them, and then you'll just do it. Do it. That's how it is. Okay, so let's get this weaponsmith up and running. So it's really simple, this factory thing. This is the factory. So inside the factory, we have what we will call a factory method. The factory method is the actual method instantiating the classes. And for this example here, we'll only need to have one method. So I'll create the method. I'm going to make a public method, of course. Everyone should be able to use the factory, and the smith should return a weapon. And I think it should be called create. Either create or create weapon or something like that. Because create signals that we're actually creating something new. So I think I sometimes see these being called something like get. But I think when you use the name get, you're thinking of getters and setters, and you're thinking of objects that have already been created. So in this case, we just want it to be called create. And then how are we going to know what to create? So what do we need to know to create a weapon? So if we look at our abstract class, we have this constructor saying we need magic damage, we need physical damage. These are the minimum requirements that we need in order to create a weapon. So let's just copy those. Magic damage, physical damage. I copy those from the weapon into the weaponsmith. Wow. And let's just do like this. But this is not enough, because how does the weaponsmith know whether to create a mace or a staff or a sword? How are we going to select that? There are many different ways to do this, and there are many bad ways to do it, and almost no good ways to do it. There are drawbacks. So for the factory method, I see some people, they would use something like a boolean for this. So, but in this case, we have 3 weapons, so we can't use a boolean. So what could we use? We could use an int saying weapon type, and then we could check if this weapon type is 0, we would choose the mace. If it's 1, we would choose the staff. If it's 2, we would choose the sword. I think this is a very bad approach. because remembering the weapon type is hopeless here. If you want to go down this road, you should use enums, which I'm not going to go through in this tutorial. You'll have to watch someone else looking into that. In this one, I'm going to use a string instead, which is bad, but not as bad as using the int, because you'll have some sort of naming, and I'll show you in a second why. So now we have the weapon type, so we'll use a switch case statement for that. So maybe that was a bit fast. There's the snippet thing in NetBeans, we just write SW and then use the tab, then it also creates a switch case structure. So in here I'm saying I'm switching on weapon type. In earlier versions of Java you couldn't do that, but here you can. And we're going to say if the type of weapon we're looking for, if that is a sword, we want to do something special. What do we want to do? We want to create a sword and then return it. So I'm going to say return new sword and magic damage, physical damage. So I am thinking that we have to do it like this. So we just send magical and physical damage to the sword and return it, and now we don't need the break part. And we need to do this for every type of weapon that we want created in our factory method. This is the factory method. So the next case should be mace, the last case should be stuff. And the obvious drawback of this is, of course, if you misspell this word, for example capital S or something like that, the program will have this assertion error. So that is not good. What I would definitely not recommend is to do something like this to lowercase. I think this is something weird where you try to guess what the programmer is doing. I want to say if the programmer needs to create a sword, he has to type it like this, or otherwise you spank him with this assertion error. I think it's a bad practice to try to fix his errors if he's using caps or something like that. That's really, I think that you shouldn't do that. An enum would be better in my opinion, but not for this tutorial here. So that's it. Of course the mace should not create a sword, but should create a mace, and the staff should create a staff. For the staff we did something special. We said we can just omit the physical damage. I just forgot that we didn't do that on the sword. I think we could also omit the magical damage from here, but we didn't create that, so let's just leave it like that for now. So you see, we can have different constructors here. We just need both of them to be here in the actual create method. So that's it. The obvious drawback of this here is that if I create some new weapon, let's say I create something like a knife, I would have to put another case here, otherwise it wouldn't work. So other than putting a new class in here, I would also need a new case in here. So I need to, when I add to my the amount of weapons I can do, I need to tell the weaponsmith about it as well, so he can develop a new recipe here. And I think this is a problem. Of course you'll have to do it in two places, but it outweighs the power that you get from this. So let me show you. Let's go back to the game we created earlier. So this is what we don't want. We don't want to create a staff like this. So what we do instead, we want to be, we don't want to be, but we have to be dependent on some things. So we're going to be dependent on the factory. We're not going to be dependent on this guy, but on the factory. So we have to use the factory in here. So I'm going to say weaponsmith And I'm going to create a new weaponsmith in here. So now I have my weaponsmith. I can then use the weaponsmith to create the staff. Oh, I still have this problem then. Not entirely, because if I call this weapon, sorry, I use the abstract class and I'm going to call this staff, and instead of instantiating it directly, I can now tell the smith to do it for me, because now he's the one responsible for this stuff. So other than putting whatever I want to do, so the staff first one was the magic damage, so let's say magic damage is 45.3 and physical damage is 0, and I need to put the weapon type here, and I need to spell this correctly. Wow, that wasn't even on purpose, I hit caps lock here. So I need to spell this correctly, of course. So this way the smith will know, oh, staff, I know how to create that, and he gets this message, and this is what we actually want to do. And now we can just add the staff to our weapons, and now we see that this import is no longer needed. We do not need to look into the concrete implementation of the staff. We are only dependent on the weapon now. So this is the single most important reason to use the factory method pattern, to use indirect instantiation of the weapons. So this is really nice. Yeah, that's it for the second part of this tutorial. In the last part of the tutorial, I'm just going to finish up this game, and then I'm going to make a last video. Where I try to discuss how we can change this into an enum, and maybe discuss a bit more how this fits into an architecture. So, thanks for watching.